Happy Tuesday, everybody. Today is May 25th, 2021, and today's guest is none other than Clint Campbell from the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. All right. Welcome to the Fall Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Blasey, and today's episode is 162. And like I said before, today's guest is Clint Campbell from the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. Now, if you've been living under a rock for a while and you've never heard of Truth from the Stand, I feel like you guys should really go and check it out because Clint does a really good job with his podcast. He's very knowledgeable, and he's been doing it a long time. I've been listening to his podcast for a very long time, so go and take a peek at that. But I kind of want to, I'm going to make today's intro short. I want to get right to this interview because I really enjoyed talking to Clint and talking about everything we did. We kind of, we jump around a little bit, but the premise of the podcast was talking about traveling to hunt. He is from PA, lives in PA, and he travels everywhere to hunt. And he actually did a cargo trailer build to be his hunting casa, if you will. When he travels, he lives in that. So we talk about that a lot. We talk about he's a public land hunter, so we do some public land tactics and everything. And I'm just going to kind of leave it there. But there's a lot in this episode, and it's a really cool podcast. So I know you guys will enjoy it. Lastly, before I get to this interview, I do want to say, we're coming up on Memorial Weekend. Hopefully you guys have a good, safe, long weekend and get to take a break from everything and go to the lake, go camping, go whatever, drinking, whatever. I mean, just go have fun, but do it safe. Other than that, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating, leave a review. I greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to go back and listen to a lot of the other episodes that we've done in the past. Last week, we did the episode of when I killed a turkey. We did a live podcast while I killed it, so that was a cool episode. Go take a peek at that. And that's about it, all I got today. So with that being said, I'm going to get over this interview with Clint. Thank you guys very much for the support. Thank you for all the downloads, and we will see you right here next week on the Fall Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Fall Podcast, and today I've got another fellow podcaster on, Clint Campbell from the Truth from the Stand podcast. Man, how's it going, Clint?
I'm good, brother. How you doing, man? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Looking forward to a good chat about deer hunting and some good company, man.
Yeah, for sure. I said this to you before we record. I feel like I know you. I've listened to your podcast for a long time, so this is cool for me to get to know you a little bit more and hopefully, spark something up here that might be a recurring theme that you could come on the podcast, man. I'm excited for it.
Nice, man. Well, I assure you I will underwhelm. I'm just kidding.
No, I like having other podcasters on because they get the game. They get it. You know what I mean? So it's like a lot of times, I'll have like Byron Horton on or Kurt Guy or something like that. And sometimes it's like you ask questions, but like, Kurt or Byron, they've like asked me questions, not that I wanted them to, but it's like it kind of the podcast host like takes over and it's like makes for good conversation. So I always thought that was kind of neat.
It is nice, man. Cause I mean, if you do this long enough, we've all had, guests here and there that, are maybe just a little microphone shy. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like, it's not everyone's cup of tea necessarily.
Yep.
I can think off the top of my head a few of those that I've had, and you're just kind of like, it can be a little bit painful. You know what I mean? Like there's some awkward silences that happen where you're like, is somebody going to say something? I guess not. So
yeah, and
exactly.
It's tough doing it over the phone too. I mean, I like it, but I don't like it. The conversation goes so much better when you can see someone face to face and kind of react the way that they're reacting. I get that, but it's like just, I mean, the podcast, I think the uniqueness of a podcast is like being able to do it wherever and whenever a lot of the times as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And you're right. It is hard whenever you're, constantly doing them over the phone. I think it becomes kind of an acquired skill to a degree. I do a lot of them over the phone just, the past 5 years. So it's kind of become something I guess I'm okay at. I certainly like to do them in person, as often as I possibly can, just for that reason. You can kind of see, when someone's running out of steam and they're done with their point, you can they give you some visual cues.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Where you're like, okay, all right, what's my next question based off of what they just said? Like, where am I going from here? And it gives you an opportunity to kind of start to get ready to pivot.
Yep.
When you're doing it over the phone, it's like sometimes you just get like that abrupt stop
Exactly.
that you weren't ready for. And you're like, I don't know where the hell we're going.
I've had that a couple times.
So I'll try not to do that to you. All right. It's like, we'll make that agreement.
I appreciate that. And I've had guys too that are like, you can just tell on the other line, you can't see them obviously, but you can hear them. They're just shitting razor blades. Like they're just sweating, like they're nervous, and it's like, hey, it's okay. Like it's we're just talking like two buddies over the phone. Just think of it that way,
It's funny what the record button will do to somebody. Just knowing that it's on, right? Because I found this out whenever in my past life, whenever I was a musician and doing that for a living and stuff, and outside of playing, it's like I was working in recording studios and stuff like that. And I learned with my drummer, who was an amazing drummer, like just unreal kind of guy. Legitimately was sponsored by a pretty big drum company when he was like 15 years old. He was on the child musician prodigy watch.
Okay.
Like, Modern Drummer did a write-up on him when he was like 15 years old, which is crazy. And I met him when we were in like our early 20s, and a phenomenal drummer, and could do everything from like jazz to like metal, whatever you wanted to do. Like he was just very, very skilled and very trained. And we would go into the studio though. We'd, write a bunch of tunes, and we would get ready to go into the studio, and like they would sound killer. And he just like the drum tracks sound great leading up to the studio time. We get to the studio, and he would just completely shit his pants.
No way.
Like you hit the record button. As soon as the record button would go on, he would start fumbling over things, and just like he would get tense. And so I started just like telling him we were sound checking. Like, hey, we're going to sound check. Let's run this song real quick. Let's rehearse. And we're just going to do a quick sound check for levels or whatever. And we would run a song, and I would just have the engineer always hit the record button when we would be sound checking. Yep. And that's usually the takes we would use. Would be his sound check takes.
That's
because they were just always way more like powerful and passionate and full of like, dynamics and stuff like that you just didn't get whenever he saw the red light go on. And he was young too at the time. I think he was like 21. So, whenever we got a little older and we were more seasoned and playing together, we didn't have to worry about that as much. He kind of became a studio drummer. Truthfully, that's what he does now.
Yep.
But he was just very raw and talented, and I was kind of I guess challenged with trying to break a wild horse to a degree. So,
yeah. Yeah,
but,
no, that's kind of the same thing we do with video. I mean, when we're doing interviews with people that really haven't been in front of the camera a lot, a lot of cameras have tally lights on the front, that hit when you hit record, they, that big red light's right there. Well, we'll turn that tally light off, and we'll kind of do the same thing, like sound check in a way, like, hey, let's do a couple of these just so the questions, and just kind of give me your answers. And sometimes you'll get the guy or whoever we're interviewing, they're kind of looking off like in La La Land, but they're saying like great answers, like really off the cuff, and it's like, man, we kind of got to use that, you know what I mean? Because when that, like what you said, when the record light goes on, man, it is clam up time.
Yeah. When you do the old switcheroo on them too, you get the opportunity to get the Ron Burgundy outtakes of like the screaming, like or
loud noises.
That or the Bill O'Reilly one. We'll do it live.
Yeah, we'll do it live.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think Johnny Carson had one too. I don't know if you ever heard that, but everyone thought Johnny Carson was like this like saint, right?
Oh, really?
Oh man, yeah. I think it's on YouTube, but just Google it, like Johnny Carson, live outtake or whatever it is. Like he loses his mind, like, and it's so hilarious.
No way.
He's like, he's completely losing his shit, and then he's like, "Let's do this," or whatever he says to do it, and they turn it on. And he's like, "Hey, this is Johnny Carson," like just falls right into the grandpa of America, Johnny Carson, that everyone knew, but like he was a complete maniac leading up to it. It's hilarious.
Crazy. I get so and you've said
showing my age there with the Johnny Carson.
You are
reference,
a little bit. Hey,
yeah.
I've watched a lot of Johnny Carson, but a lot of it was VHS. Like it wasn't live when we were doing it. So.
Yeah, so I did watch some live. I'm showing
Okay.
my age here. It was later in it was when I was I was a little kid, and my grandfather used to love watching it, and my dad did too, truthfully. So it's like I kind of watched it with them, especially my grandfather. He was a big Johnny Carson guy. So
I got you.
But I think it was good because, like, in my opinion, I got to see him and like all the other late night people after him, and like to me, he still is kind of like the gold standard for late night.
Yeah,
so
definitely. So, in all the years doing a podcast, what have you ever done an interview where you're like, you get off, you stop recording, you're like, man, I really don't know if I can run that. Like,
oh yeah, I've had some of those, for sure, where you're like, man, I'm just not sure, and then but the other thing is too, man, is that. We're always kind of our own, worst critics to a degree, right? And I've always kind of had this philosophy, even when I was in the band. It's like you got to release the good and the bad, because if you don't, like the bad's going to hang around.
Yep.
And you just got to get it out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So, and not that any guest was bad or terrible or whatever. Sometimes it's my fault. Sometimes I'm like, man, I just didn't ask like great questions in that session, or I was unsure, or, how to steer the conversation. So it's not always the guest's fault. You know what I mean? It's like there's plenty of times where I screw the pooch and just didn't, I'll get done and I'll listen back as I'm editing. And I'm like, man, I missed an opportunity to ask a really good question there.
Yeah.
Or man, I missed an opportunity to ask a really good question here. Oh man, I should have followed up with this,
Yep.
And, so it's just, it goes both ways. It's like I've screwed up just as many as anyone else has, for me.
Yeah. And, I get that like weekly. I feel like when I listen to them back, I'm like, and I'll tell you what, like the first 30 or maybe even more podcasts that I ever did was like, I can't go back and listen to them. They're absolutely brutal. Like I cannot listen to them.
my whole first season, I'm like, that guy's an idiot.
Yep.
Like,
who is that guy?
I'm like, I don't know why anyone even listens to this.
My studio started in one of our closets in our old house. For some reason, I thought it would be good to start a podcast when my daughter was like basically born. So I'd record when she was sleeping at night, and I felt like I was like so quiet and monotone. You're like you're not trying to wake up the house, but it was like, oh my gosh, looking back, and I'm like, why did I do that?
Yeah, my office is right up against my daughter's bedroom. So whenever I do podcasts, she's like, tonight she's like, Dad, I'm sleeping in your bed tonight because you're too loud. So I've lost my sleeping spot, at least for the time being, as we sit here.
I got you. Well, you can blame that on me.
No, we're all good.
Well, good deal, man. I enjoy your podcast, listen to it a lot, listen to it for a couple years now. And if anybody hasn't listened to it, go check it out. You do a great job over there. I do want to first get off. I got to ask a selfish question here. I'm a coffee connoisseur, and you have a coffee company, Skull Brew Coffee, and I want to know a little bit more about that. Like, what's your inspiration behind that? Like, where did it come from? And I guess, why did you want to start it?
Right. Yeah. Great question. My wife wondered the same thing. No, it was, I'm just kind of I like to make things, that's really what it comes down to. It's like, it goes back again, not to harp on the band stuff, but it's like, playing live wasn't my favorite thing. Being in the studio creating was always my favorite thing. And that's kind of what led to the podcast too, was just making stuff, creating stuff. And, we were sitting around at one point. I was, kind of thinking about like, what would I like to start? Like maybe another side business, cause I had the podcast going, and I was always kind of like, I'd like to start something that would be kind of associated to a degree. And I was literally in a deer blind one day with my buddy Wilson, and I, every now and then in late season, we'll go out and hunt together, because he has some access to some, small private parcels around where we live. And we'll go out and just try to maybe whack a few does in late season. And he was like, hey, I'm going to go hunt this one property. Do you want to come along? And I was like, sure. I wasn't doing anything that Saturday. So we went out, we were sitting in the blind, and we didn't really see any deer, and we were just kind of talking. And he's from the Pacific Northwest originally, so Washington, so coffee, big deal in that area. Yep. And we started talking about coffee. And, the truth of the matter is I actually had another business that I actually built the business plan for and went and pitched investors prior to the coffee thing years ago. I think it ended about the time I started the podcast, but it was a craft whiskey distillery to open in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
To eventually make bourbon, but to start as craft whiskey. And I got a lot of I had most of the investment I needed. I was just a little bit shy, and I just wasn't willing to kind of rescale the business opportunity. So I dumped it and folded it. And so my buddy and I were talking about that whiskey business, and we started kind of talking about coffee, and I love coffee. And I was like, man, I should start a coffee business. He's like, you should totally start a coffee business. And 6 months later, I started a coffee business.
Holy cow.
That's really how it started. But the rationale behind it is I was trying to think of like, what can I do that I can, start relatively quickly, to get it off the ground somewhat quickly. Because the goal was really to try to figure out a way to give back more to conservation, because, I had realized, as I was, going through my hunting journey, that there's so much that I get from the outdoors, and I'll never be able to pay the debt that I have to the outdoors, in my lifetime.
For sure.
And so, I think it was actually the year after I got back from Montana, and it was just like that trip out west, hunting out west and seeing that landscape and experiencing, getting drawn back on an elk and having close encounters with mule deer and elk, and, seeing, just all the things you want to see when you go on a Western DIY kind of backcountry hunt like that. It really kind of made me have a different level of appreciation for wild things and wild places. I had an appreciation before, but it just really kind of gave me a different perspective. And so that was really the kind of genesis of it. And the whole goal was to try to create something that would, create a revenue stream that I could continually give back on a consistent basis, aside from, just paying my dues to like the different conservation groups that I'm a member of or whatever, which is great, but I was like, I have a skill set in marketing and advertising. Could I use that in some way, shape, or form to benefit the outdoors?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did. And so we started a Skull Brew Coffee Company. We donate, 10% of our profits back to conservation organizations. And when you go to the site and you buy coffee, you can click a drop down menu. There's a couple conservation groups in there that you can say that you want your portion of your proceeds to be donated toward. And we have 3 roasts. We have a dark roast, a medium roast, and a light roast. It's a Papua New Guinea, a Colombian, and Ethiopia Harar. And then we just recently released some backcountry packs, which are kind of single serve pour over packs for when you're traveling, hunting, camping, whatever the case is. You don't have to have shitty coffee anymore when you do those things. And those instant things, I've tried every kind you can possibly think of, from every brand imaginable, and they all suck. And so I got tired of that. So I just decided to make my own pour over version of our coffee, and it's killer. So awesome. That's kind of the story behind it, man.
That's cool, man. That's really cool. And, I've heard you kind of tell that story before on your podcast. I wanted to get it out here for this. And I was asking before, any way I could help out, like to get the word out there. Like, I love how you're giving back, and I want to figure out a way where I can give back a little bit as well. Anywhere I can help, like, I'd love to be able to do that. But that's cool.
For sure.
Like I said, I'm a coffee guy. I really enjoy it. And your brand, I like the looks of the brand and the name of it. And like, it's just kind of like something I feel like you look at and you want to be a part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the brand name was funny, kind of how it kind of came about was I was fooling around with doing European mounts, taxidermy, like European mounts in my garage. And I had like domestic beetles, and they smelled terrible. My wife hated it. And so I was kind of fooling around with that. And like the idea was that I was going to do some like on the side, European mount stuff for folks, just like friends and just local people and stuff like that. And that was what I was going to use that money to create the coffee business, was the idea. And then I went on a hunting trip, and then the heater broke in my bug box, and they all froze to death. So when I came home from that, I had no more bugs. And so, I ended up just footing the bill myself to start the coffee business. But that's kind of where the name came from, because I was making skulls in the garage. So Skull Brew,
that's cool,
coffee, so that was kind of how the name came about.
That's awesome. That's really neat. Yeah. That's sweet. And good on you, man, for wanting to do something to give back. That's really cool. That is.
Yeah. And I can't take all the credit, man. My wife does a lot of work for it, all last summer, cause I was building that trailer, all my weekends were eaten up by, converting that conversion trailer, that cargo trailer that I had. That, my daughter and her basically did every farmer's market on their own last year,
really?
Just themselves. Yeah. And so they're a big part of it. And the other part of it too, man, is I wanted my daughter to see that you can create something on your own and create your own destiny. You don't have to go to work for somebody else.
For sure.
And so I wanted her to kind of see that and have a part in it, and, take some ownership of certain things. So she goes to the markets, man, she helps. she rings people up, she promotes, she helps pack things up, and she's a good worker, and and people tip her because she's cute, so she always likes that too. So
there you go.
yeah,
Good job. That's cool. Well, speaking of your trailer, I don't know if a lot of people listen to this know, your trailer conversion, how you did that with that cargo trailer, but that's kind of the basis, not the trailer anyway, but why you did the trailer is what I want to get into today, and that's like traveling to hunt. I mean, you live up in PA, right? You're up in PA.
Yeah, yep, yeah. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Did a short stint in Florida for a while whenever I was doing the music stuff, but been back in PA for I guess going on 11 years now, roughly. I live, north of Philadelphia.
Okay, I got you. So you're traveling a lot for all your hunts, basically out of state. I mean, you do hunt PA and everything around you a little bit, but I mean, you're doing a lot of traveling, and that's kind of what I want to get into today is like traveling on a budget to hunt, and then just some things like when you get to a new piece, I've got questions for like, how do you break it down, and and how do you get away from the intimidation factor? And then one big one, I'm not going to tell you right now. It's something that I deal with when I'm trying to find a stand location, but I want to know, pick your brain about it too. But that's kind of what I want to get into if you're good with that.
Yeah, man, let's do it.
Well, I guess first and foremost, I mean, you built this trailer, so tell everybody about the trailer first. And I guess the big question I want to know is, you were probably doing it for one reason to save money and be more efficient. So I guess, did it save you money after using it, and was it more efficient?
Yeah, so it was really a long-term play. So just in full disclaimer here, anybody who's not going to travel consistently, it's probably not the right move because it does cost some money to do. Like, and if you're going to just go like 1 year and then maybe in 3 years from now, you're probably better off either camping it or just, getting a hotel close by or whatever. But for me, I travel every year for multiple weeks. And so I know I'm going to be going somewhere. And the thing that I was really kind of struggling with to a certain extent was, I was either staying at like getting a cabin somewhere or, or staying at someone's house or whatever the case is, right? Or renting a hotel room or whatever it is. And it gets expensive, right? And that was one kind of component of it. The other part of it, and it really kind of dawned on me more so whenever I went to Iowa, and I was hunting a particular piece of public in Iowa, and I had a cabin that was close by, which was kind of like lucky, right? I got a cabin that was like, they're usually all booked up.
It doesn't happen like that all the time.
Right. And so it was relatively close to where I was hunting. So I kind of lucked out, and I was fortunate that this piece was pretty big that I was hunting too. So after that hunt, I was like, man, I really got lucky to where it's like I was finding good deer. I didn't have a lot of pressure. It's Iowa, so you're not going to have a lot of pressure, at least in context to what I'm used to in Pennsylvania. And I had good deer to chase, and I was on deer, and so like it worked out. And I was like, but man, if it hadn't, and I could only draw once every 4 years, I was kind of stuck, like staying at that one spot.
Yep.
And how I hunt just on the ground, typically in general, it's like I'm a pretty mobile person. Like I move a fair amount and, try to find the hot sign and hunt the hot sign, all the things that you should be doing. And I wanted my ability to jump from public to public to mimic how I hunt on a particular piece. So I didn't want to be locked into a spot. And the perfect example of that was this past year going to Missouri, where, Tethered was filming, the hunt. And so added a little bonus of like, definitely have to try to figure out how to find deer. I didn't have a chance to scout any of it before we got there. So it was all a completely, like, shout out to John Eberhardt, completely freelance hunt, which I, learned and got the confidence to do from him. And ended up on the first piece, and in 2 days, like, we found deer, but like there was just a lot of pressure that was kind of rolling in. And this was the first week in November. So we left that spot, went to another spot that was about an hour and a half away, and we hunted that for like 2 days, got on deer, had a good encounter, and a bunch of pressure rolled in. And so we were like, let's bounce from here. Went to another spot, and I ended up hitting one and losing it, unfortunately, on the last day, but got into deer within 2 days in the third spot. If I didn't have the trailer, I would have been locked into that first spot the entire week. And so the trailer really allowed me to just kind of go and find, try to find success and not be kind of hamstrung by where I was at. And just, I don't like to necessarily just play the hand that I'm dealt. I want a new hand,
sure,
if I can have it, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really the kind of the genesis of creating the trailer. Was that the added bonus is over the course of, three seasons or whatever, the amount of time I'm going to spend in it to scout, travel to hunt is certainly going to pay for itself just in the amount that I would spend in hotel rooms and stuff like that, over the course of 3 seasons.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And honestly, me thinking, my biggest thing would be convenience, like, to me, like you're hunting public land. You've got a lot to think about. Let's just break that down. Like, you've never been to this piece. You've never scouted it. So there's a lot of mind games going there. You got some pressure. You're only going to be here for so long. And it's like, you want convenient. Now, you were able to like hook onto your trailer and go to the next one, unhook, and know after you get done with a freelance hunt, you're coming right back to your trailer and you're like, everything's there. You're not moving. Like, the convenience alone, I think, would be worth it in the long run, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, that convenience factor was huge for jumping from piece to piece. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. I mean, we could have tent camped, you know what I mean? But there's also, when you're out grinding, because that was a 2-week trip. Like, so that was the first week. The second week I was in another state for another 7 or 8 days.
Yep.
So I was out for like 15, 16 days straight in that thing, so trying to tent camp in that with like different conditions and stuff like that. And, just, you can do it. I'm not saying you can't do it. And plenty of people do. But for me, it's like, if I'm going to go out and grind like that and hunt all day and put on miles, some days I'm putting on, for whitetails, I might put on 6, 7, maybe 8 miles, depending on how far I have to walk to find the sign I want to hunt. Right.
Yeah.
So, I want a semi-comfortable place to lay my head is really what it comes down to, because I don't want to feel like dog shit the next day to try to go do it again.
Yep.
And so that was really kind of one of the reasons. The other reason is just in the planning process. Like, part of the hard part of the planning, whenever I would go to a different state to hunt, was just trying to figure out where I'm going to stay. That's close by. You know what I mean? That's reasonably priced and will fit what I need. And so I just completely take that out of the equation, because not that you're supposed to do this. Like, so this is not the dirty little secret, but the way I built it is I made it it looks still like a trailer. And it doesn't look so much like a camper other than like the window that's in it, but could just be for events. So I'm kind of stealth camping in places and maybe pulling off along the side of the road somewhere where it's like, I just want to walk in right here. And it looks like, oh, someone's truck's broken down there. And that's where I'm camping. You know what I mean? So, so it's like, I'm doing some of that just so I'm cutting down on the amount of time that I have to walk or drive to a place. I'm trying to camp as close as I can to where I'm going to enter. That way I'm just being as efficient as possible.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense. And so, I mean, you did answer my questions. I mean, was it efficient, and was it worth building it, I guess? So I would think you're saying check the box on both.
100%. Yeah. I mean, the efficiency was ridiculous, just in terms of just having everything that you need. I was able to eat there, have a solar generator. We can get into the build and like what all is included, but it's a little home away from home. So it's like, I don't really give up much, from a comfort standpoint, other than like a shower or whatever. Yep. I built a shower to take along. So I have one of those if I need it. So certainly efficient, and it was totally worth the build. I mean, just, what I would have spent, think about 15 days and if you have a cheap hotel room, or a cheap cabin or whatever, say it's like $100 a day, or whatever. It's like, it's $1,500 for that trip alone. You know what I mean? It is what it would have cost me in just the, living accommodations for the 2 weeks.
Yep. How big's the trailer?
It's 6x10, so it's small.
Okay.
I originally wanted to do a 7x12. But what happened was my grandfather passed away, and then my grandmother had this old trailer sitting at the farm. My grandfather did a lot of woodworking and crafting. That's where he kept like all his materials and stuff. And she just wanted rid of it. And so I was like, well, what do you want for it? And she's like, well, give me $800. And I was like, perfect. I was like, here you go. I was like, It was smaller than I wanted, but in hindsight, it's probably perfect because it's so small. I can just fit it into almost anywhere.
Right.
Like, I don't need, that was the other thing too. It's like, I didn't want something so big that I had to kind of figure out like, where can I park? Like, with this thing, it doesn't matter. If I can put my truck there, I can put this thing there.
Yeah, definitely. You got me thinking, man. My dad's got an old cargo trailer like that. He was a contractor for 25 years. He's going to be listening to this podcast. So, Dad, if you're listening, I think we need to convert your trailer.
There you go, man. Dude, it's like I learned a lot from doing it, man. So it's like I can totally give you a ton of pointers.
I'm going to be picking your brain.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, cool, man. That kind of checks the box on those for sure. So now, getting into the build and everything, and so is this last fall, was it the first fall with it?
Yeah, it was. It was the
Okay.
first season. The funny thing was, is I was planning to try to do like a hunt just close to my house because there's a place that I use that's water access. It's a little bit of it's not a terrible drive. It's like a half hour from me, but to take the kayak and all that stuff and set it up and get it out of the truck and do all that stuff, it takes a little extra time. And I was trying to get this hunt in the morning before work and get back. And we can talk about that too, because I built it to where I can actually work out of it.
Okay.
So my plan was to take a maiden voyage that was local, that was close to me in case something happened, it broke down or something like that, that I was, not far from home to try to take care of stuff. But it ended up being that I finished it up, didn't get a chance to take a maiden voyage. So its maiden voyage was hooking it to the back of my truck and driving like 1,000 miles, 1,100 miles to Missouri. That was the maiden voyage.
Oh my gosh. No better way than just throwing it right into the fire.
Yeah. I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to work out. I hope it all works, but here we go.
What year's the trailer, do you know?
Oh man, it is a 96.
Okay, so she's old.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, she looks every bit of old too. It's got this really cool distressed purple paint because my grandmother's favorite color was purple.
Perfect.
And so it's a purple trailer it's all like sun faded.
I love it.
Yeah, people keep asking me, it's like, are you going to wrap it with like a skull brew wrap or like a Truth from the Stand wrap? I'm like, heck no, man. I was like,
it's a billboard.
I was like, then I'm giving away like where I'm at. I was like, no dice. It's like, I'm going to keep the silly purple looking trailer.
Yeah. Now, and this is me asking selfish questions now because I know I got a trailer that I can convert, but how was the frame and everything? Did you have to do any, because I know a lot of those frames, they get kind of rusty and everything like that, and the floorboards and everything are kind of rotted out, but like, how was the structure of it to begin with, or did you really have to revamp this thing?
No, I mean, the bones of it was pretty good. I mean, fortunately, my grandfather, he's, an old timer farmer. So, I mean, he buys something once and he buys it for life and takes care of it, so it was pretty well taken care of. There was a little bit of rot in the floorboard, and it's pretty typical with trailers that, it'll be back behind like one of the tires somewhere. Yep. Truthfully, I think it was probably less from that and more so from, as he got up in age and was getting sick, like it sat out, then he moved it out of the barn and it was sitting next to the barn. And I think the tall grass just kind of grew up around it, and like the moisture from like the dew over the years getting up under it. And that particular side is what kind of rotted that part of the floorboard out. So there was really only one section. It was like 1 foot by 1 foot that I had to replace.
I got you.
And so I just cut that out and then, metal screwed that back into the frame, and I was pretty much good to go. But everything else was pretty solid on it.
Yep. Now, when you were getting into this build, did you have a budget that you were hoping to stay within, or was it just like, well, I'll figure it out when I get done?
Yes and no. I didn't really want to spend any more than like $3,000 if I could help it.
Yep.
Roughly, and I stayed right around that, if I'm not mistaken, 3,000 to 4,000. I might have been closer to 4,000
with buying the trailer, or is that just doing everything
to
it?
With buying the trailer, I'm pretty sure.
That's pretty damn good.
It might have been just a little over 4 with buying the trailer.
Gosh, I feel like that's pretty good.
But yeah, I mean, the thing was too is like, and some people out there listening, might be like, well, why didn't he just buy like a used camper or something like that, right? Well, if you get a camper for $4,000 or $5,000, like it's not going to last you. Those things are built to fall apart.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. The insulation's crap in them; they're not great and stuff like that. And there's all kinds of things internally that can go wrong, from heat to electrical to whatever. I built this thing to where I'm hunting and not fixing it when I'm out hunting.
Right.
Like, so there's nothing that's in the walls, like nothing's wired in the walls. I did that on purpose because I wanted to run everything off of like AC power from my solar generator or off of batteries, because I don't want to be, or recharging, rechargeable batteries that I plug into like the solar generator to recharge while I'm out hunting. That way I can use the lights at night or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I don't want something to short out in the wall and then I'm without light, for the trip, or I'm trying to figure out how to fix the lights or whatever it is. Like I wanted as few things that could possibly break and ruin a hunt as possible. That way, if something breaks and it's not critical, I just wait till I get home to deal with it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that was kind of the approach. So, I spent probably more on it than a lot of people would need to, because I kind of went overboard with the heat. I went with a vented heater. It's called a Dickinson marine heater, and it's really built for boat cabins.
Okay.
It's around 9,000 BTU, so it's way more heat than I need for that small a space. But I mean, on nights when it got down like the 20s and stuff like that, dude, you were glad you had all 9,000
Right.
BTUs of that thing,
Right.
So, and then the other thing that was one of the most expensive things, because I think brand new, those are like, I want to say like $1,200 or $1,300. I ended up finding it on wholesale for, I think maybe like $800,
Oh,
if
wow.
I'm not mistaken, or like $750. I got a deal on it. And then, the solar generator that I have is called a Blue Eddy, and it's a 1,500 watt hour solar generator,
Yep.
which is a ton. And the reason why I went with a bigger generator, and I have 280 watts worth of solar power on the roof, and I use sun power panels because those seem to be the best and they last the longest. They seem to last the longest. At least that's what I've read in like all the reviews and how people are using them and stuff. And they're flexible. They're not the real thick glass ones. They're pliable ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that generator with that many watt hours because I podcast from there. I can work from there. I have a cell extender on it as well, that as long as I have cell service, I can use a hotspot and work and get on Zoom calls for work if I need to from the trailer, so I can extend hunting trips if I want.
Yeah.
So it was like I went overboard with those things, and someone could get away with doing way, way less if they're just going out to hunt and being more primitive. You wouldn't need nearly as much. Like I would still opt for the good heater, but you can get, like a 500 watt hour solar generator for like $400
Yep.
or whatever. You know what I mean? Because that Blue Eddy, I think, is like $1,500 or something like that. I think is what they are new.
Yeah, but like you said, you needed something like that to be functional and everything, work related, podcast related. So you're, not necessarily leaving the office. You can still do your thing out there. That's good.
Right. Filming hunts, charging camera batteries,
Sure.
running laptops, like all that stuff, we needed to be able to do on the trip. And so that was kind of the rationale behind, the gear that I put into it from a power standpoint.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, I know you did some videos on this, so I would, me selfishly, want to get deeper into this, but I want to get into some other things, but kind of direct people to those videos real quick. Are they on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, you can just go to the Truth from the Stand YouTube channel, and I think there's like 3 in progress videos. You can kind of see how the build came along, everything from, when it started to how I installed certain things, how I installed the solar and the solar panels and stuff like that. And then there's one that I did more recently that was kind of more of a wrap-up video, where I just kind of talked about, after living in it for a couple of weeks, what I would maybe change, what I'd maybe do differently, things I'm thinking of doing for next year, or maybe modifying for next year.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I just want to do a whole podcast on that, but I might have to pick your brain off podcast for that. So sorry, everybody out there listening.
For sure. Yeah, I think the most critical thing is just like to circle back on that one more time, not to sound like the White House press secretary with a circle back, but the most important part of whenever you're figuring this out, especially if you're going to use a small piece, is the bed and where you're going to put your power, because you don't want cables and shit running everywhere. And so those are the 2 critical things to figure out. And like, I'm short, I'm like 5'9", the trailer's 6 foot wide, internal walls with insulation and stuff like that makes it just a little shy of 6 foot. So I can lay sideways in the trailer, like fully stretched out. So I put a bunk in it in the back, you know what I mean? Just built out of 2x4s and plywood on E-tracks. And then underneath is storage. And then for my buddy Chad Sylvester from Exodus to sleep, because he's usually the guy who's with me most of the time when we travel to hunt, I just put another set of E-tracks up and actually got a hammock, and I string it from one end to the other.
Oh,
and
nice.
And then that way it collapses back underneath my bed when we're up in the morning to get ready to go hunt.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how we slept 3 people in Missouri. It was me, Chad, and my buddy Zach Shermer that was doing all the filming.
Mm-hmm.
And Zach actually was staying in the hammock, and Chad was just sleeping on a pad next to the door.
Okay.
And so the 3 of us lived in that thing for 7 days.
So structurally, like on the walls with that hammock, did that affect anything at all?
No, the way I set it up, so I put it on E-tracks, and I just, I don't know if people out there listening are familiar with what E-tracks is, but it's essentially that slotted metal that is in the back of like a tractor trailer that they use to put ratchet straps on and stuff, right? And so there's basically like loops you can buy, like rings that click into those, you know what I mean? And so I bought those rings, and then the carabiners just clip into those. And so whenever I was putting the E-tracks in, you're not always on a stud necessarily, but I tried to put at least 2 screws in a stud, you know what I mean, on the E-tracks to give it that support. So, I mean, it'll conservatively hold 500 pounds without failing. So, at least that's what the hammock is rated for, and going into the wood studs and pretty long screws as well. So it should be it should be good.
Right. I got you. That makes sense. I just lost total train of thought here. Sorry about that.
That's all
I'm
right, man.
deep in thought here.
You're contemplating the. Well, let me ask you this, man. What size is the trailer that you're thinking of converting?
It's the same size as yours. I'm pretty
Oh,
sure
really?
it's
Okay.
did you say yours was 6x10, right?
6x10. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Single
sure
axle.
it's the same size. Yeah.
Nice.
And
Nice.
single axle, but I don't think yours has the door on the side. I don't think my dad's has the door on the side. I
Yeah,
think
that
it's
was
just got the
key.
two. I know it, and I'm trying to think. That's where I was kind of losing. I'm like in La La Land now. I'm like, I think it's only got the two doors in the back.
Yeah, but you can put a door in it. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. It's like I was watching videos on how to put doors in. Dude, I watched videos on everything you could possibly think of how to convert a
Yeah.
trailer.
There's a
But
ton of it out there too.
yeah, it is, man, and it's for good reason. I mean, it's a slick setup. Especially for guys that especially if you got a couple buddies, like a couple buddies go in on something like that you all can use it. It's like it's a great tool for that kind of stuff. Propane tanks on the front, couple propane tanks, a toolbox on the front. You're good to go.
That is cool. And hey, you could, if you don't have a camper, you could even take the family and just go camp somewhere.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. My wife refuses to go anywhere in it. So that's number one. But my daughter, for her birthday, or not for her birthday, I think it was for Christmas, I got her, she likes to horseback ride. She takes horseback riding lessons and stuff. And so she and I are going to this equestrian camp together at the end of May, I think, to go do like some trail riding for like a weekend. And part of that was we're taking the trailer to this lake and we're camping at this lake and then going to ride horses and stuff like that. So I'm at least taking her in it.
That's sweet. That's cool. Yeah, you got me all giddy now. I got to do it.
Yeah, dude. I expect some phone calls from you here in the not so distant future on some trailer gear talk.
No, you'll probably get sick of me. I'll be calling you all the time.
It's all right, man.
Well, let's do a hard transition here. I want to get into for a little while. I want to be conscious of your time also. I know it's late at night here.
Dude, I'm good. I'll go all night, man. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, I can go all night too. So let's get into this. So you like to travel out of state. I guess first and foremost, why do you enjoy traveling out of state to hunt?
Initially, I didn't really, it was just more the intrigue. I wanted to see something different. You know what I mean? Like that. And that was really when I started kind of, falling in love with hunting public land because I had a family farm, still do. We got close to, I don't even know what it is, like close to 400 acres back home between like maybe 2 or 3 different properties that the family owns between my wife's family and my family. And I haven't hunted them in years. And part of the reason is because I have to drive back to do it. And so I wanted to really kind of hunt public around me because I didn't want to have to drive back all the time. And I ended up finding and getting on good deer around where I lived. But that was really the whole thing. It's like that, whenever I was hunting the farm, I was limited to, the deer that were on the property to a degree. And if there wasn't a deer that really tickled my fancy, it was kind of a bummer of a season to a degree.
Yeah.
And there was one instance, there was one particular deer, it was the best deer that we had really ever had on the farm from an age standpoint. He was 4.5, and I watched him for 3 years. He was just like this big mainframe 7 that was, he was a 7-point that was, my buddy Tate ended up killing that deer, and it ended up scoring like 120. It was like 120-inch 7-point, which is a pretty big 7-point.
That is a big 7. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was 4 years old, and that part of PA gets slaughtered. So you don't often get a deer that's 4.5 years old in that area. Generally speaking. And I had that deer kind of pegged. I had a bunch of encounters with him, and I knew he was bedded on the neighbors. I just couldn't kill him. Like I had to wait for him to pass this one pinch point on the farm to pass. And I had my last encounter with him was the opening day of whatever year that was. That season, it was like October 1st opener. And I had an encounter with him at 20 yards, and I just couldn't. He was behind some brush. I just couldn't get a shot. And so it was at that point where I was like, I want to start having experiences and encounters with the caliber of deer in the age structure, age class of deer that I would like to have. I'm going to need to start looking at going other places. Mm-hmm. And so, the first one was out to Ohio. The following year I went for, I guess it was a week, and I had some really great encounters with some, seeing some killer rut activity and deer tearing up trees and, just the whole thing you would see on like, you think like a TV show almost. Like I saw that all take place. Blew an opportunity on a really good buck on day 5, and then killed a nice Pope and Young deer on day 6. And I kind of stumbled into that place by truthfully getting lost. And it was just that like idea of like I could just explore and go find deer was really kind of interesting to me. And that was when the bug kind of bit, you know, and then from there, it's just become more of an obsession. And my goal, you know, and I've mentioned it on my podcast, I think I mentioned it on the Exodus podcast, but my goal is to try to kill a Pope and Young whitetail in every state I can possibly travel to.
Mm-hmm.
That's my goal. It's like a bucket list goal. You know, it's like, and, you know, not trying to kill the biggest, you know, that's not the goal necessarily. I just want to have great encounters and kill, you know, quality deer, you know, in every state I can possibly travel to. So if in my lifetime I get to 20, it's like, I'd like to kill 20 Pope and Young whitetails in 20 different states.
I love it,
man.
You
know, whatever that number is, you know, and maybe I don't get there and that's fine, but it's just that like that seeking adventure, you know, and not knowing what's around the next bend. And, you know, sometimes I get to go scout these places and sometimes I don't. Like sometimes it's just purely freelance hunting. And sometimes it's places like the one area that I hunt, you know, in the Midwest that I go back to year over year. That's a big woods piece that I have some history with and some intel on and some really great deer there. And I just, you know, I won't stop hunting that place until I finally kill one of them. So,
yep.
You know,
I love it.
That's kind of the gist of why, you know, why I started hunting out of state. It was really just trying to new experiences. And I really feel like hunting new places and getting outside your comfort zone is how you expedite your learning curve of becoming a better hunter.
100%.
Like, the thing it's done for me as far as like just seeing different terrain, different habitat, how, you know, thermals are going to work in different types of settings and stuff like that outside of like, you know, the farm that I knew and kind of could predict, you know, what winds were going to do and stuff like that. It really makes you think about things in a different way and certainly has helped me up my game.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You know, you can hunt the same piece of ground year after year and you're going to probably stick to those spots that produce year after year or, you know, the better spots on the farm. Like, I got a perfect example. My family farm here in Michigan, 215 or 18 acres, I think it is. And you know, my dad's hunted it since the 70s. And, you know, it's where I cut my teeth. And that's the thing. Like, there's probably 40 acres of that property that I've never touched before because we only go, like, you typically stick to, like, the areas that have produced in the past. But last year, I really got into more mobile hunting, like, you know, put a stand up, take it down, like all that, like, and it like refueled a fire for me on that farm. Like the sky's the limit. And when I started going into spots that I've never been before, I learned so much. And I'm going to say the first 5 sits, I learned, you know, even more stuff about different types of terrain and, you know, whatever it might be, like different situations. You just learn so much and you hit the nail on the head. Like, I couldn't agree more. And that's what I'm trying to tell myself and then telling everybody listening to the podcast is like, get out of your shell a little bit and, you know, do things that you wouldn't normally do, and just try it, get aggressive. And I think you might fail a lot, but you're going to learn while you're failing. That's how I learn the best and the most is like failing, if that makes sense.
100%, man. And the other thing is too, is like, I'm pretty lucky. Like I said, like I travel and hunt a fair amount with Chad and, you know, and have some good buddies that are, you know, who are really good hunters and, you know, in different states and that hunt public or whatever the case is. And it's an interesting kind of tight knit group and we're all kind of there to help each other because we're all, you know, our experiences aren't kind of just associated with like a piece of property that none of them are ever going to see. You know what I mean?
Right.
So for example, it's like this coming weekend, you know, Greg Litzinger, the bow hunting fiend, like he's coming into town and he and I are going to go scout together. Yep. You know what I mean? Because there's a piece I haven't hit yet. I need to check out because I think I lost a deer there this year that transitioned to me. And I think that's where he went. So we're gonna go tear this clear cut apart together, right? And it's doing that type of stuff that like I just learn a ton from doing that type of stuff with different people and hunting with different people. So like going out and hunting with Chad and seeing how he hunts and learning how he reads topography and what he's looking for in habitat and stuff like that. Zach was awesome whenever he was running the camera. Like that was just, he was from Missouri, you know, while we were in Missouri hunting, like he was filming everything, but he was from Missouri, but not from a different part of Missouri. But it was just interesting to kind of get his perspective on like when we would be kind of figuring out what our strategy was going to be for the day. it was ultimately my call, right? Because he was, he's the camera guy. He would say
Right.
that to me sometimes. He's like, I don't know, man. I'm just running the camera. You do what you want to do,
Yep.
But I was really wanting to see it was just good to be able to bounce stuff off him because he hunts a little bit different. He has a little bit different perspective. And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Because it's almost like a blank canvas and you just kind of go make of it what you will. And you truly, I don't know, I feel like hunting private sometimes, and this isn't all the time. And look, I still like to go do some private hunts. I'm not poo-pooing it at all. I'll go hunt with a buddy of mine if he's got access somewhere, or whatever the case is. But, you really kind of have to let the hunt come to you to a degree on some of those places. And I'm not saying you don't be aggressive or you don't try to go find deer, but I feel like on private, at least this was my experience, and this might be just me being an idiot, but I would force the issue sometimes. Like you almost want to will something to happen in a spot because you feel like it should.
Yep.
Whenever you don't know every nook and cranny of that piece necessarily, say you're traveling out of state, like again, Missouri, like went to 3 different places, knew nothing about any of them until I got there. I don't care where the action happens. I just want to be in the action.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so I don't have any preconceived idea of like, wouldn't it be cool if this buck came down this ridge and did this here because that would be the perfect spot to shoot in? It's like, no, I'm just going, this is where the sign's at. It looks like garbage, but everything's telling me it's going to happen here.
Yeah, dude.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And this is actually one of the questions that I had for you. And it's basically like when you're going into a spot and you're finding sign and everything, and you're like, okay, I need to be in here. How long, what's your process when you're trying to find the perfect tree to sit in? And I feel like that falls into this scenario right here, because I could sit on the ground looking in the trees for 20 to 25 minutes and picking apart every tree when really just get up the damn tree. You know what I mean? In a lot of scenarios, like how does your process work when you're at that point?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like Missouri was a little different because I had a camera guy with me, so it had to be able to accommodate 2 people.
Right.
That was a little bit of a different thing for me because that was the first time I've ever hunted with a camera person. So sometimes, I'll get into a super small tree, but we needed more cover because there was 2 of them. There were going to be 2 of us. You know what I mean? So that was one consideration. It's like I'm always kind of thinking about cover. The first thing I'm thinking about is like trying to figure out, or understand based on the sign that I'm seeing and based on if, like, depending on what the terrain is or what the habitat is, like, how do I expect deer to come in here? Like wherever I'm planning to be, right? Like if I'm going to hunt over a scrape or near a scrape, or if I'm going to hunt, some type of pinch, or, I don't often hunt rub lines, but if I'm hunting a rub line, or if I think I'm close to, an area where a buck might be bedded, or whatever the case is, I'm trying to figure out, time of day plays a role in this as well, and time of year, obviously, but I'm trying to think like, how is this deer that I'm going to try to kill? How's he going to come in here?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And why would he come in from that direction? Like what would be the logical reason for him to do that? Right.
Yep.
And then and that's sometimes, man, it's like, unless you've got trail camera intel or data or something like that, or you were sitting back maybe 60 yards from that spot and you watched a deer move through and you're like, oh shit, I'm 60 yards out. I need to move. I'm going to get down and move. And now I know how they're kind of moving, outside of that, it's an educated guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And, you're thinking about, and to make that educated guess, I'm thinking about, okay, based on what I know of the terrain, I'm looking at my map, this is the direction I would think he would come from based on what I think he's doing currently, right? Pending time of year, right? Bedding, food, is it rut, whatever the case is. And then it's what is the wind and thermals doing? Mm-hmm. And how is he going to have the advantage? Because I'm going to try to set up to give him the advantage as much as I possibly can without screwing myself. And that's ultimately how I'm kind of making the decision. So it's like I'm dropping milkweed, looking at my prevailing, looking at what's going to happen throughout the day to try to predict. So I know what the wind's going to do throughout the day. So I know, like, I'm going to try to set up, pick the tree and set myself up to be able to have a kill opportunity when I think that deer is going to come through. So I'm not so worried about what the wind is doing whenever I'm there getting in. I'm worried about what the wind is going to be doing when I plan for that deer to come through.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so that's why I go back to, like, it's different answers for different times of year and different kind of scenarios, because those all kind of play a role in how you're going to choose your tree. Like, so if it's a rut, trip, and you don't have anything that's going to funnel them specifically like hardcore in a specific direction, right? You just know it's a good pinch and it could come from any direction. lot harder to figure out like how you're going to give him the wind.
Right.
You know what I mean? If he can come from any direction, right? But, I'll give you an example. When I was in Iowa, when I killed that deer, I found a bunch of sign, and I kind of tracked down where this deer was at over the course of however many days. It was the last day of the hunt. Long story short is I ended up missing the same deer twice, like in the course of like 4 days, and had like 4 different encounters with this one deer.
Holy cow.
Which is, like in completely different spots. So I kept catching him again because I kept finding his sign and like getting back on him. And then I bumped the deer out of his bed, and I tried to bump and dump, but he never came back. A younger buck came through. And so I went back the next day and I set up, and what it was, there was a draw down to my like right-hand side, right? And there was a trail that was kind of coming through the cedar thicket right from where these scrapes were at. And so that's near where I bumped that buck from. And I was like, and there was a kind of a point behind me that dropped off. Right. And so I was like, man, I bet I can set up along this draw, because all the deer activity I saw on that trip for bucks was after 2:30, all of it. And so I was like, I'll hunt this in the evening, and I probably won't see anything till like between probably 2 and dark, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was watching the weather, and I knew that my wind was going to be shifting, and was actually going to be almost 100% wrong for me whenever I thought that deer was going to come through. But I would, if I got enough thermal pull into that draw as the thermals were dropping, as it gets on to evening and the sun starts coming down, it should buy me enough room to where if he comes through head on with the wind in his face, my scent should just be to the right of him enough to where when he recognizes I'm there, he should already have an arrow in him.
Yep.
Right. And I played that to a T, and that's how he came through, and I ended up shooting him.
That's
and
crazy.
killing him. Right. And so that setup was like, I had a little intel because I bumped the deer out of there. I actually, when I tried to bump and dump, a young deer came through and read the script exactly what I thought a deer would do. So I knew how deer were probably going to filter through there. And I needed to set up with a barrier so he couldn't get downwind of me. Because if he was trying to get downwind of me, he had to get into that draw and be 100% open. And he wasn't going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I had the thermals in my favor. I had the open kind of draw to my back in my favor, that he couldn't get downwind of me without exposing himself. And so I knew he would stay up in the brush, which would give me like a 16-yard shot. And it did.
That's crazy. That's cool, man.
So it's like, it's just trying to understand those things. But that was an instance where I had some intel, but there's plenty of times when you don't, and you're really just making an educated guess based on the terrain, the habitat, and what the wind is doing, and your best assumption as to where that deer is going to come from.
Yeah. So would you say best case scenario? I know it's very situational, very loaded question, but like when you're in a scenario, would you say you need to either know where this deer is somewhat bedding or feeding or vice versa or both, to try to make the best educated guess or best move?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, if you know any one of those things, like, you're way better off,
right.
For obvious reasons. I mean, I'm self-admittedly not the best bed hunter necessarily. That's something that I'm kind of always kind of, working on. But, I'll give you a for example. Like, so this year, in October, there was a couple good deer that I had in this one piece that was in Pennsylvania that was near me. And I had a cell camera, and I was kind of watching them, and I kind of knew that they were in the area, and they kind of moved off early season. I kind of assumed there was a bachelor group of 4 of them, right? And one was a giant that I ended up glass in and ended up trying to hunt on the ground because I thought he was going to change, or he was going to shift at the beginning of October. And so I ended up kicking him out of his bed and didn't get a shot opportunity. And then I never saw him again. There were 3 other really good deer that were kind of in the area, and any one of the 3 I was willing to kill. And one kind of showed up on the camera in daylight mid-October. And I was like, okay. So he came in with about 30 minutes of daylight left. So what that told me was, I was like, he's close to bed. Like, I'm close to his bed, because he's coming. Mature deer don't get up and kind of start moseying from their bed, in the middle with daylight left.
Right.
Very often. Right. Especially the older ones. Like, they're not going to start really. Have you ever heard people talk about the best time to kill a big deer is like that Thanksgiving kind of time frame, right? The older deer kind of know how to play the game, right? Those first does that are going to come in, stuff like, they're not going to start to get the party started until later in October, beginning of November, most likely, right? So a lot of times when you see younger, deer hitting scrapes or moving in daylight in mid-October, it's often youngsters, right? When you see one that's got a little age on him and he's up and you maybe catch him on a camera, maybe catch a visual of him, with 30 minutes left of daylight, pretty good bet that
You're
if you
close.
timestamp it, you're probably not far away,
Yeah.
right? And so whatever it is, like you can backtrack a deer the same way. It's like you can, he's hitting a camera in a staging area, or you get a visual of him in a staging area, right at dark. It's like, well, then think about, all right, well, if he got here by 5 o'clock, right? How far away could he possibly be bedded? Where's the next best bedding opportunity? And knowing what direction he came from, what terrain features or topography was he using? And then you can start to figure out, like, where's the next best bedding location? You don't have to find the exact bed. You just have to find what he's using to bed. And it might be an acre, it might be 5 acres, or whatever it is. But now where his core area is where he's spending time.
Yeah.
Right. And so this particular deer, I kind of knew where he was. I knew where he was, not exactly bedding, but I knew what general kind of 3 acre area that he was using as his kind of core area at that time of October.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in to hunt him, and it was on a Saturday, didn't see him, and we can't hunt on Sundays in Pennsylvania. And he showed up there. He actually passed the camera that was on the way to where I was set up on Sunday with about 15 minutes of shooting light left.
Which is ridiculous, by the way, that you cannot hunt on Sundays in PA.
Yeah. So exactly. Tell me about it, man. Because this deer did this to me twice. I hunted him on 2 different Saturdays where I had the right wind. And he showed up on a Sunday both times with 30 minutes of daylight left, 15 minutes of daylight left both times. Yeah. So I missed him by a day, and I would have been there on Sunday because I had the exact same conditions both Sundays that I would have been back in there to try to kill him. This was all water access stuff. So it's stealth in, stealth out. They never know that I'm there.
Yep.
I shouldn't say they never know that I'm there. They always know you're there at some point. But, as clean as you can possibly be, I'm in and out of that place. So in that instant, it's like, yeah, it made it a lot easier for me to figure out where to set up because, man, I had intel. It's like I could see what direction he was coming from. I could see what time he was hitting certain areas. And so then at that point, I knew I was close. So then it just becomes, well, how do I get myself in between me and the deer? Right. And you can do the same thing even if they're showing up on camera at dark. Again, you backtrack and figure out what's the next best bedding. How long would it take him to get there? What time would he be getting up to have to move? And then you just start backtracking, you know what I mean? And figure out, okay, well, how far away do I think I can get, or am I comfortable getting from where I think he's bedded, to see if I can either kill him because I think I know what terrain or what topography or terrain features, or edges of habitat he might be using to travel, or at minimum, maybe you get close enough and you get a visual and you really start to learn see what he's actually doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of goes to a point too. Like I was talking to your buddy, Chad Sylvester from Exodus. I did a podcast with him not too long ago. And I was talking to him about how I've totally revamped how I use my trail cams, and kind of go back to your point on intel. If you can get some intel on some deer now, when I'm in Michigan here, I'll put my cameras out and I'll let them marinate literally all year in areas that I want eyes on all year. So one of the farms I hunt here in Michigan, it's a big timber farm, literally a mile section of basically timber. I mean, there's a few ag fields in there, but it's big timber. So I put a camera in there, let it sit all year, hunting this good deer early on. Well, I pulled the camera after season, and he was on this camera in the first week of October in big timber, in daylight. Every picture was in daylight for 4 or 5 days straight. He was in daylight. So I figured, yes, it is early October, but he was a more mature deer. I mean, he was not a slouch by any means. I figured I was really close to where he was living. It was right where a swamp meets hardwoods, and then the hardwoods is the transition into an overgrown clear cut that had been clear cut a couple years ago. Now it's just overgrown. So I kind of learned, and there was a couple other deer on there too, bucks that were strictly daylight, all daylight. So I learned a little bit about that spot, and then this year I'm going to go in and take it a step further and put cameras in there, but I'm going to hunt it now. And it was just one of those things I feel like mature bucks are going to use this area the same. I just got to be there to capitalize and use the topography and, like you said, the wind and everything to my advantage to really get in there and try to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Some guys don't like cameras, and to each their own. I personally feel like if you have the time to be in the woods all the time, that there's no substitute for that.
Right.
But, being completely honest, like I'm a working guy like most everybody else. And so it's like I need every advantage and every bit of intel I can possibly get. You know what I mean? To help me make a plan for when I'm going to hunt, and there's plenty of times when, I'll go in and, if I don't have, I won't say if I don't have good intel from like a camera, it's like I'll still hunt places, and those will be days, where I'm going in and I'm literally just going to put boots to the ground and try to go find sign.
Yep.
And a lot of times, that's in areas that I might not be as familiar with, even locally. You know what I mean? It's like I might not have hunted a place for a while. And so it's like, all right, I need to go in and figure out where deer are spending time. And a lot of times that's even just pressure related.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because PA, like Michigan, man, there's a ton of pressure. And like what I've found, and I actually kind of kicked this around with Zach Farrenbaugh at one point when I had him on the show, was we were talking about scrapes just, in general, and, and using those to hunt and so forth, and hot sign just in general. And, what I've kind of noticed, and I think he kind of corroborated to a degree, is like, you get those first set of scrapes that are opened up, and a lot of times, people will kind of rush to those. And I actually just talked to Nathan Keelan about this too. And a lot of times, like, because he doesn't hunt scrapes per se, right? He hunts like the to and from the scrapes, because truth be told, it's like, most scrape activities at night, right? Unless you have primary scrapes that are just like the central communication hubs, then you are in a little bit of a different situation.
Mm-hmm.
But big sign attracts people, right? And if you live in a high pressure state, the chances are you're not the only person who saw that big sign.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So chances are someone's also hunting it, right? So if you're hunting it, you're probably not the only person hunting it, right? And so what I've started to find is like, where is the secondary, what I refer to as like the secondary scrape line, right? And the secondary rub lines or whatever, and just sticking on scrapes for now. Because what I've started to find is like, this first set will open up in October, and man, if they're opening it up in October, it's like chances are they should stay like get tended every so often, right? Like they should stay open for a little while. It shouldn't be like, I know when you get like end of October and in the beginning of November, sometimes some of the areas I hunt, it's like you will have a scrape and it will open for 3 days and that is it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's like and it's done, right? But usually the ones that are opened up earlier in the year, it's like those are kind of some general communication ones, for at least from my experience, that like they may not get hit every day, but they're going to stay open for a little while, right before they go cold. But what I found is a lot of these in some of the areas I hunt, it's like they'll open up in mid-October and be off in like a week and like done, closed up, not opened any longer. And then what I found is like if I push back in further, I start picking up that sign again. Like the deer all like moved off that first line of that first set of sign, that first set of like bigger sign that they laid down, and they've moved off to like the deeper timber to get away from the pressure. And then they start laying down, their quote unquote kind of like pre-rut and rut activity or whatever. And so, that's one of the things I kind of think of whenever I'm, trying to think about, going back to like setups or whatever, and if I'm trying to figure out what a deer is doing, it's like he might be doing this now, but like what is he going to be doing later? Not only as the season evolves, his food changes, his biology changes, and then inevitably people change his behavior.
Right. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I don't know why, and there might be other people out there thinking that too, but like that, you walk into a sign and majority of your hunters, I would think, on public or private land, are going to run into a couple, big rubs or a couple scrapes, and they're going to be like, oh, you get that like feel like I need to be right here. I've done it. Everybody's done it. I like that secondary thinking of like, okay, so back up a step, take a second, figure out, what else is around here, and maybe you could go 60 yards down, a little further, and then that might be your secondary spot, and that's 60 yards could make 15 minutes of a deer's movement. Like, to go back to like what you said with mature deer, they don't just get out of their bed and start running around, unless it's the rut. I mean, he's gonna shake, he's gonna stretch, he's gonna sit around for a while, in that area. He's not gonna move much.
Well, just think about when you wake up, man. If you're just say you're in your 30s, right? You're a 3-year-old deer.
Yep.
And we're not even talking like 4 or 5-year-olds or whatever. It's like you're in your 30s. It's like, man, when your alarm clock goes off in the morning, you just spring out of bed and be like, hell yeah, let's do this. No, it's like
Hit
you wake
snooze
up
4 times.
right. You rub your eyes, you stretch. You're like, damn it, man, it's time to get up already.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like, all right, I got to scratch. I'm going to go take a leak. You know what I mean? It's like, it's the same thing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's like, that's, so they're not really, I won't say that they're no different, but it's like, yeah, it's like they're going to kind of mosey about, especially the older they get, the more they mosey, just like we do as men, it's like the older I get, the mosier I get,
Scratch yourself, go take a leak. Yeah.
Exactly, man.
The difference in deer, they can take a leak and right outside their bed if they want. A lot of us can't.
I might have done that after a couple beverages one time. The wife wasn't real might have ruined a good pair of her socks, shall we say.
Funny secondary story real quick. In college, my college roommate, every night that he would just get absolutely, had too many barley pops basically, he would come home and he would pee in his hamper. He would just take a leak in his hamper. And I mean, it happened numerous times.
Why not, man? Why not? You're going to wash that stuff anyway, so it's all good.
Exactly. That is funny. Oh my gosh. So kind of going a little further, you're obviously, we know you're a big public land guy. So, and you travel. So when you're traveling, like, how are you figuring out where to go to hunt? Like, what types of things are steps are you taking to figure out, okay, this is an area I really need to pursue, and this is what I'm going to do this fall?
Right. Yeah. I mean, first it kind of goes, for me at least, I'm thinking about what states have I been to, and like just what places do I have an interest in seeing? You know what I mean? Like I want to see a bunch of places. So like this year I'm going to Kansas, and so I'll also start buying points in advance. So I typically have like a rolling 5-year plan. So I kind of know like what the next 5 states are going to be, and I'll kind of plan those things out. And for some of those states, like I'll be buying points for them, namely Kansas. Kansas is pretty easy to draw. So I got one just for insurance. So I knew I'd basically have 100% chance to draw this year. Iowa, I buy points every year for Iowa. So every 4 to 5 years, I can go back to Iowa. So that's one thing. Just, start planning so you have the points that you need. And then from there, it's like, what type of hunt do I want to have? Like this year, I'm really stoked and looking forward to going to Kansas because it's going to be a lot of ground hunting, because the area that we're targeting to go to, it's like there's not a lot of trees. Doing that on purpose because most bow hunters that travel from the east, right? Because the east is most popular, most populated, most densely populated, are going to want trees. They're classic stand hunters, or even if they're using a saddle or whatever, just a lot of guys aren't comfortable hunting from the ground. You know what I mean, with a bow in their hand, right?
Yep.
Just because of how close you have to get. Gun, a lot different, right? But bow, close encounter, you got to be able to get close, and so. That was the other thing I was looking for. Is like, let's go somewhere where we can, ground hunt. And then once I kind of figure that out and kind of like narrow down the state, then it becomes like the normal things you would start to think about in terms of like pressure and access and like what type of habitat does it have? Is there always looking for places that have diversity of habitat? I really never want to go to a place that's like, where the habitat's just homogenous, right? Like I don't want to just see like all hardwood or all swamp or all CRP or whatever. It's like, I want some changes. I want some edges if I can get them. I just want diversity. Right. And so I'll kind of look for those types of things, maybe contact a wildlife biologist, for the area, or a DNR rep, whatever the case is, to try to get a little intel, do a little searching to figure out what areas might have the type of deer you want to hunt, or the caliber that you're looking for, or the experience that you want to have. Man, I use my personal network like crazy. You know what I mean? Like the one benefit from having a podcast, I've met hunters from all over the place that have hunted all over the place.
For sure.
You know what I mean? So it's like, I probably know someone who has hunted close to where I'm going to be. I don't know how many times. There's one guy in particular, Brian Broderick, that owns Day 6 gears, Day 6 arrows. Like I was going to Missouri and I was like talking about this place I was going to go, and he's like, "Oh, you're going to this place?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, how do you know? He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I hunted over here." It's like, so, you start to think about like, well, who do I know who may have hunted like some of these places, or have a friend who lives there, or a cousin that I could maybe get some info from, or whatever. And that's really truthfully how I start to put it together. And then you get into like the classic kind of like what you do once you start to kind of like narrow some things down. You start doing your scouring of your maps and what does the map look like? What does the topography look like? What does the access look like? Can I get into somewhere that I have to use a boat? Because that's going to cut, like, you're going to have way less bullshit factor with pressure if you have to access it by boat. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so start looking at stuff like that are just going to be barriers to people, getting up in your business, and that's really kind of the approach I take. It's not super scientific. I probably labor over it more than I need to. And then the other part of it too is just think about, like, are you a person who's comfortable freelance hunting, or does it need to be close enough for you to be able to get to do a couple scouting sessions to feel good about going?
Right.
That's the other part. Like, for me, it's like, I'm a, like, screw it, let's go do it type of person, where it's like, I don't need to see it before I get there. It's like, I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yep.
But some people don't like that. Look, if I have my choice, it's like, I like to go scout, so I kind of have an idea of what I'm walking into if I can.
Yeah.
But, I'm fine going in and not, I'll figure it out. And sometimes that's part of what I want from the hunt too. It's like, man, part of this thing is just also seeing what you can do, like what you're capable of. Like, that one for me was like, that was what I loved about that trip in Missouri. It was like, never had set foot there, and I'm just going to go figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And can I do it, or can I? It was the same thing in Iowa. I went and scouted it, but the place that I scouted, I hunted for 3 days of like that 16 days. And then after that, I went to a different place I'd never been before and just figured it out.
Really?
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, there's something about that. Like, there's something about that type of hunting. It's just freeing, that you don't have any preconceived notion of what's going to happen. And you're making decisions on instinct and gut, and it forces you to not overanalyze things and just make a decision, right? And, like, when you see hot sign, you hunt hot sign.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And not second guess and be like, well, what's over this ridge? Like, there's plenty of times where I did that, and I would kind of circle back and maybe hunt that sign that I originally found. But, most of the time on those trips, man, it's like when I found sign and like my spidey senses went off, it was like I got into a tree, or there were a couple setups in Missouri where it's like we just set up behind like a down tree on the ground and had an encounter.
Yeah. Do you typically tend to get married to a spot or a piece of public? If you get there, or is it like for 3 days and you don't hardly see anything? Are you bailing?
I'm bailing, dude. I don't get emotionally attached
to
much of anything. Now, I can't say that's true for Pennsylvania. I do. It's funny because my buddy Litzinger makes fun of me for it a little bit. We were talking about it one day on a podcast, and he was like, man, he was like, you actually hunt better and more free in places that you don't have any information on.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I think you get in your head too much, and you're trying to, and that's what I was saying earlier, where it's like, in some places that you have history with, you try to force something to happen in a place that you want to happen so bad because that's where your mind is telling you it should happen, versus letting the hunt come to you and the woods tell you where it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time doing that in places that I have a lot of either history with or that I have intel on or whatever. And so I'm a guy that's like, I'm probably better with like just enough information to get me excited, but not enough for me to like really make a plan. If that makes sense.
No, it does. Totally. Yeah. Greg, I've had him on a couple times on my podcast. He's good shit. He does. Yeah. He's good, man.
Yeah. He's really I'm lucky to call him a good friend, and I'm, I get to spend as much time with him as I do. Cause he's one guy that, like I said earlier, you pick stuff up from the people that you get to spend some time with, out in these, different, pieces of public or whatever the case is, and spend time scouting with them or picking their brain or whatever. And, definitely fortunate to call him my buddy, and, to some degree, a little bit of my hunting sensei, if you will, what I mean? Like, cause he's local and we hunt very similar type of stuff, like around us, cause he's in Jersey, I'm north of Philadelphia. So we're not far from each other. And, we talk a lot during hunting season and bounce stuff off of each other and look at maps, and I'll send him pins so he can look at something for me and just get his opinion. And so, that's really what it's all about, man. It's that community, the brotherhood, and trying to help each other get better. And when you can find some guys like that, man, keep them close and don't let them go.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that for sure. So you're typically not getting married to a spot then. Now, when you're getting to a particular piece, it can be very intimidating, how big pieces can be, or just never
Mhm.
being there and not knowing a lot about it. How do you deal with that intimidation factor?
I'd be lying if I said that I don't get intimidated, because I just think it's natural, and it's not so much like it's not scared. It's more of like a WTF. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, it's like, what am I going to do? You know what I mean? It's like, there's so much here, right? And it's the fear of missing out, really, is what it comes down to, right? Because there's so many places that you look at on a map that could be good, that you're just not quite sure where to start, right? And that's normal. And there's some things that you can do depending on what the terrain looks like and stuff like that, right? It's like, pick an area that looks like, again, going back to like what I was saying, if I'm going out of state or whatever, it's like you start marking stuff off, right? Like, why, like certain areas that you wouldn't go check out, like too close to a road, which sometimes are the best spots if they're overlooked, right?
Yep.
But easy access, right? Too close to a road, whatever the criteria is that you're using to kind of like whittle out spots. You go through that and you just mark off the stuff that you don't want to see. And then you start looking at the places like, okay, here's a place that has a bunch of diversity. Here's a place that has a bunch of topography. Here's a place that has a bunch of like whatever, right? And then you start to kind of mark what those places are. And you take that chunk from being, I'm experiencing this now in a piece in northern PA, in a piece of big woods. When I say big woods, it's not like the Adirondacks or, something like that that's millions of acres or whatever the case is. But, that this particular piece is over 100,000, pushing, probably like 140, 150,000 acres. And then there's other adjacent pieces that are around it. So it's just in that general area that you could drive to, there's probably a couple 100,000 acres that you could be hunting.
Right.
And and so I'm kind of going through that now, and I'd never been there before. And I'm talking now just about scouting it. Like if I were hunting it, it's a little bit different, but somewhat the same. I'm basically taking the Johnny Stewart method, and I learned this from Johnny, and it made a lot of sense because he hunts, out in the Alleghenies, and that's huge country out there in Western PA. And what he's basically done is he was like, what I do, is I take like a 5-mile area, for example, right? Or whatever size. I'm just using that as a number. Maybe it's like a 3 square mile area or something like that. And he's just like, I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to learn that. I'm going to learn how to hunt it. I'm going to learn what all opportunity is there, right? And once I feel like I've sufficiently learned that, you could probably spend years learning that,
Right?
You know what I mean, and not know all of it. And then you just kind of go find the best stuff that's in that area. I mean, there's some things you can do, like on your map scouting and stuff like that, to try to narrow it down because you just don't want to go in blind. It's like, for me personally, it's like I'm looking for clear cuts, right? It's going to give me edge. It's going to give me diversity of habitat, and typically going to give me good food and good cover, right? Depending on the age of the clear cut. So that's a lot of time what I'm going to focus on, right? Because if you know nothing else, follow the edge. They're going to likely lay down sign on the edge of that clear cut somewhere, where it meets the hardwood or where it meets a swamp or whatever the case is, right? And so that's really how I start to break stuff down, is I start to find things that I'm familiar with, right? Like what is something that I understand, and start from there. I don't start from a position of like failure and being behind the 8 ball. I go, okay, what is something here where I could start to find success and find sign, right? That I have a level of like comfort in my skills, and then go from there. And then once I start to kind of learn more about the piece and kind of understand like what the deer are doing a little bit, now I kind of get and can go like, okay, well, how does this apply to some of these other areas in this piece? And just start to methodically kind of break it down. The other thing is, like, I'm a firm believer in these big pieces, man. Like, a lot of these big woods chunks depends on, how they're managed. But the piece that I'm in, like the clear cuts are few and far between, and it's pretty vast, and, it's in the Pocono Mountains. So, but it's not necessarily a lot of topography change because you're really kind of up on top of the mountain.
Right.
Right. And so you're not dealing with like ridge systems and stuff like that. And so it's a lot of flats. So it's a lot of swamp on a mountain setting, right? Without a lot of structure. And so the deer can kind of move almost anywhere. And so what I'm learning about this piece is that they really kind of exist in pockets. And like, if you're not in a pocket, you're probably not going to see shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, you got to be in. So it's finding those little pockets and like understanding how they're, like, I found a buck bed in the most random place you would find a buck bed on this piece. It was in the wide open timber, but it was on a contour line on a map that you would assume that would be a good travel route. And I've picked up a rub and I followed this rub line and like, boom, buck bed. and it was off the edge of a clear cut, like a fair distance, probably 30 yards, but it was in the middle of like completely open hardwoods.
What do you think he was doing there?
And there was hair in it, and it was worn to the dirt, so I know it's used pretty often. I can't say for sure whether he's like bedded there, all October or November or whatever. My best guess is like there's an oak flat that's not far away, so he's got food that's pretty close. The position that he was laying in that bed, he was looking down off this little like slope. So it wasn't classic 3/4 of the way up the ridge. It wasn't even so much a ridge, I wouldn't call it, but there was a clear cut behind him, so I'm assuming there's probably does bedded in there, right? And then he's bedded kind of 30, 40 yards off the edge of it. The prevailing wind was going to was in that area southwest, which would be coming over his back from that clear cut. And the way his rub line came, the way he was positioned, he was watching his back trail, and he was also watching everything out in front of him because it's wide open.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that particular, and he's got an oak flat that wasn't too far away. So in that position, he's got food, he's got cover, he's got the wind advantage, and he's got his bitches during when it gets to rut. If he's still kind of sticking around that area, which I would imagine, that would be part of his range during rut based on the sign that I saw.
Yeah,
but the sign's very spread out and very not super concentrated, and so that's the part that I'm trying to interpret now. Because typically, you get into certain areas that have a lot of structure, your mind goes you see a scrape, okay, cool. But I don't care until I see a primary scrape and just like hammer scrapes laid down or hammer rubs, right? And this just isn't having that. I'm finding rubs that are, a little above my stomach high on an okay sized tree, but typically wouldn't get excited about it. But to give you an example, the one area I hunt, in a state in the Midwest, that I hunt pretty consistently, super low deer density, but this past year had probably 4 Boone and Crockett deer on camera.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the biggest rub I found was on something that was about the size of my wrist. You know what I mean? So so big deer don't necessarily always equal big rubs. And this is something I'm still trying to learn, from I'm saying big tree or big diameter tree. Usually you maybe get one that's tall and you can start to tell based on the length of it or whatever. But, one of the things that I'm learning is a lot of times in these big wood settings where these deer, where their ranges aren't necessarily overlapping, either because of low deer density, which in the place in the Midwest, that's kind of the issue. It's low deer density. Or in a place like where I'm at in PA, which PA typically has really good, has good deer numbers as far as density goes, but they might just be so spread out because the habitat is really only conducive in certain pockets for them to live long term. So these bucks core areas and ranges may not be overlapping to create that competition to lay down that sign.
Yeah, why leave bitches if you got bitches?
that's just it. You know what I mean? And so that's what I'm trying to figure out now. That's just a hypothesis, but that to me is part of the fun. It's you make up the scenario in your head of what you think is happening, and then just like the scientific method, you go and you either prove it or disprove it. Either way, it's valuable.
Yeah.
It's there's no value. There's just as much value in me being wrong as there is in me being right. And that's kind of how you get over the intimidation factor. It's not about being right. It's about learning it and progressing it.
Yep. Yeah. So I got a scenario for you. When you brought up how this mountain, you're up basically on top of these hills, these mountains, but it's flat. So give this scenario here. Let's say you got a flat setting, but you've got diversity. You got edge. You've got swamp. You got hardwoods. And then you have a rolling hill area. Are you typically thinking it's easier to figure out a flatter scenario like that with more diversity and more edge than it is a rolling hill kind of, topography changes a lot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for bedding or if you're looking for just a travel route, I would think maybe just a little bit differently, but typically, I'm going to go where the cover is. Yeah. And so if that rolling hill has cover, I would probably go check that because I would think does might take that low lying area, especially if it might be a little bit more, more easily accessed, to a degree, if there's easier access there. And I would think, bucks might be bedded up on this to maybe get a little bit more of a thermal advantage, on a prevailing wind, depending on what the prevailing wind is in that area. So that's what I would kind of be thinking of, is like, where's the best cover at?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's in the swamp, then great. If it's an area that might get a lot of like hunting pressure, and it's mid-season, yeah, I might be looking at the swamp, because it's likely that they probably got driven out of the areas that they were comfortable in prior to the pressure picking up, which might have been on that rolling hill or whatever the case is, right? And so, it just really depends. Like, I don't find one or the other easier necessarily. I think the flat, to me, in my personal opinion, is harder for me unless I have significant diversity of habitat.
Yep.
Right. Whenever I get into like some of this homogenous stuff that just like where there's no like edges and stuff like that, like it's hard. It's challenging. There's not a lot of structure. The deer can move anywhere. Trails aren't concentrated. Right. And so you're really looking for like minuscule sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But, I would me personally, I would probably concentrate on the swamp, just because it would have the best cover, especially if it were rut, definitely on the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
If it were maybe earlier October to mid-October, I would maybe give a flyer to that rolling hill, again, depending on what the cover looked like on that and what the prevailing wind would be and what the bedding opportunities would be on that. Then I'd maybe give that a flyer. But I think you also have to think about your access with some of that too. It's like, what can you get up? Can you get to that rolling hill without getting busted?
Right.
Or do you have, where there's a will, there's a way, right? It kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, what's that deer going to do?
Yeah.
Do you think he's bedded there? Right. If he is, how far are you willing to push in? Can you get to where you need to be to get an opportunity in daylight? All those things kind of start to play a factor.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. I was just curious, like, in your opinion, like, I was, trying to get more, like, where are you getting, what's sucking you in more? Are you more of like the flatland guy with a little bit more diversity, or a rolling hill guy?
Mm-hmm.
But you nailed it. I mean, with what you're saying, like, you're looking for cover, so you're going swamp if you can get a swamp.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take cover on a if I can get cover on a ridge, something like that, like just a real brushy, like not necessarily the top of it, but like the side of it.
Sure.
Where the elevation is, or where the elevation changes are, or like a really gnarly ridge that's kind of steep that has like not even like the smallest, but just like a bench that kind of flattens out, like partway down, that just like
a
provides
secondary
a little
ridge kind of.
Yeah, like just like a significant bench. Like I found that in like, the big woods that almost like a let me give you an example. So the area that I was just in PA, I was looking at the map and I was like, all right, we're coming off this ridge. It's kind of a slow slope down, but like as you get off the point of that ridge, there's one area that kind of flattens out before it drops off into like this creek bottom. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, some of the other places I've hunted in the big woods, that's always been like a classic place to congregate deer and deer sign, because like they like to make sign on like lay down scrapes and flat areas, right? And so whenever you're in areas that are sloping and stuff like that, you maybe don't quite find as many. And that area just looked like it was kind of brushy, so it was like the best of both worlds, right? It's coming off this ridge, it kind of provides this little like bench area off this point or whatever, and it just seems like that would be a place where deer would congregate.
Yep.
And sure enough, went there and found scrapes. And I didn't find a lot of scrapes in this particular piece. And so, so I'll look for like little things like that, just like little anomalies that kind of occur in the terrain. If I'm thinking of hill country, or more specifically, a couple of different terrain features that kind of tie in like multiple ridge systems.
Sure.
Or whatever. Yep. You know what I mean? Like those types of things are dynamite, just because those are areas that are just kind of like they're highways, right? They're like pulling. It's like the roundabout for like 5 different roads.
Yeah, definitely. No, it really is.
You know what I mean? And so it's those types of things when you can get them, you know what I mean? When they start to connect multiple, ridge systems together or whatever through like these like a particular bench that kind of winds around, and connects like 3 different ridge systems, like through a saddle, it's like, boom, like you probably got a pretty good idea how deer are going to use that general area. So I'd probably be following that and checking that out.
Yep. That makes total sense. Yeah.
So,
Are you more of like a passive or aggressive kind of hunter?
Different at different times. And I know that's like the shittiest answer ever from one podcast.
Not a cool answer.
Yeah, I know. From one podcast host to another, it's like you always hate getting it. Like, well, it's both. Yeah. But no, I really think it's depending on where you're hunting. This is something I've had to kind of, I guess, I've learned somewhat the hard way. You know, I think earlier, or several years ago, I teetered back and forth between being, overall more passive or patient, to then teetering the complete opposite way and being way more aggressive all the time. And what I learned is that you really have to kind of take into consideration where you're hunting and what the hunt calls for. So, for example, if I'm somewhere where I have a lot of structure, just say like around Pennsylvania, or let's just say Missouri, for example, a lot of structure. Pieces were relative, like decent size. Like the one piece was like 1,700 acres. One piece was about, I think, close to 7,000, and the other piece was like, I don't want to say like 4,000 or something like that acres. I was pretty aggressive on those hunts because I was freelancing them, and I had a limited amount of time to get something done. I didn't know anything about the places, so I had to just go kick up deer to find deer. Is kind of how I put it, right? It's like on these out-of-state hunts, it's like I'm willing to go basically move deer in order to know where they're spending time.
Right.
I'm willing to kind of give that part of the surprise factor up just to know where they're at, right? And then make a plan from there. Now, which is great, and I sometimes do that in Pennsylvania, but in PA, I'm probably a little bit more patient because I have a little bit more intel. So I try to make a little bit more of a plan and try not to blow up the spots where I think I'm going to have an opportunity, where I could have an opportunity based on sign and based on in-season scouting. Like that's the one thing, man, that like I just don't think people do enough of is they do a lot of scouting in the postseason. It's like if I could only scout one time, I would scout in season. Like I wouldn't, if someone told me you could either postseason scout or you can in-season scout, I would say I will see you in September.
You're kind of going against the grain there a little bit too, from what a lot of people would say. Not that in-season scouting is bad, but I would feel like a majority of people would say, give me that like right after the thaw, or the winter, the late season. I want to see all that sign that was just laid a couple months ago.
Yeah, and what I would say was you don't know when to show up.
Right.
In October or November, because you don't know when that sign was made, right?
Sure.
And they're both critical parts of the puzzle, right? If you can have both, that's great. Like, because what you should be doing is your postseason scouting should be your data gathering, right? And I'm thinking in like marketing terms, right? Like research, right? That's your research, right? What you're doing in October and November or September, depending on when your season opens, right, is data validation. So now you're validating when that sign is actually being placed where you found it in postseason, right? That tells you now when to hunt it. Because if you come across a scrape in February, was it laid down October 15th?
Right.
Was it laid down November 3rd? Was it laid down October 15th, but then not opened back up till the 28th? Like you don't know, you know what I mean? And so that's why for me, it's like, I started having better encounters and just more encounters in general whenever I started being cool with in-season scouting and knowing that like I might have to move some. Like, look, if I have a deer in an area and I've hunted an area for a couple years and I kind of have an idea, yeah, I don't need to go back in until I know it's time to kill something or try to kill something, right? But if I'm in an area and like I'm not seeing what I think I should be seeing, I need to go figure out why that is, And so then that's when your in-season scouting becomes critical, And so, And so to go back to answer your question, areas that I'm patient in would be like, a big wood setting. That is one area where I will scout in the postseason, try to figure some things out, do some in-season scouting to do some quick validation. But if you have hot sign, you might need to sit it for a couple of days because you don't know when that buck might come back to tend that sign.
Right.
He could have a 3-day loop, could have a 7-day loop. You don't know. Depends on how far he's traveling. You know what I mean? So sitting it just a day, and I think in the big woods, especially if your access is good, I feel like you can get away with a little bit more hunting the same spot for a couple days versus, maybe a smaller parcel or whatever the case is, because there's days where I'm hunting, I'm not seeing deer at all. You know what I mean? Like in some of those settings, right? And I've hunted plenty of those where it's like, this year is a good example. Had a Boone and Crockett that I knew like to hit this one scrape that historically opens. And he hits it in daylight during like a 3-day window in October for the past 3 years, right? Pretty good intel, right? Year over year data. He's done it consistently. I sat those 3 days at that spot, never saw him. Now, I jumped a big deer on my way out the third day because I was changing spots. I was getting a little bit more aggressive, right? I was like, I'm going to move. I'm going to go find some sun. I'm going to set up and hunt. Did that. And on my way out, I kicked a very large deer out of a bed, and didn't see what it was, but I heard grunting. So the way the hunt played out was I got in the morning. I got into the tree. It was foggy. I started hearing a doe blow, and my wind was falling back over this draw that was behind me. So I knew she didn't smell me, and she sure as shit couldn't see me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been in my tree for 10 minutes, so she certainly didn't hear me, so I'm like, what the hell is making that deer blow? And so I was just trying to figure out what was going on. And then all of a sudden I heard just like a super deep grunt, just like, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And so my immediate thought was, I'm like, this thing's like a mile back in too. And
Right.
I was like, you gotta be kidding me. There's a guy set up blowing on an extinguisher like 200 yards from me. I'm like, get the F out of here. You know what I mean? Like, that was my initial thought because I'm from Pennsylvania, right? So I hear any type of deer sound in the woods. I'm like, that has to be a person.
Yeah.
Well, then what happened was like that grunt moved about 100 yards down the ridge. And then I was like, oh shit, that she's blown because I think a buck is bumping her. Right.
Yep.
And so I grunted back, and I might even touch the rattling antlers together. I don't quite remember. And then she took off. And then he grunted a couple more times. And I could hear the grunt move across the ridge. Now he was through this draw, like up on this ridge, like across from me. So he was probably like a good, I don't know, maybe 150 yards away, 200 yards away, something like that. And so I assumed he chased her, right? Like, cause I didn't hear him anymore. Like after that, she blew out, he grunted a couple more times. Grunts sounded further away. And so I assumed like, well, he's gone after her. And so I sat for a while till probably like, I don't know, 10:30 or something like that. And I wanted to get down to try to get to another spot to try to catch the early afternoon cruise or action.
Yeah.
And got down and was walking out. And when I walked up, like to walk out this 2-track, that deer was bedded along that 2-track and jumped up and blew out. And I never saw what it was, but it was a solo deer, bedded by himself. And was, from the sounds of him hitting the ground, like it was no doubt it was a large bodied animal. So, and it was right from where the grunts were coming from. So, I mean, it had to have been him, was my thought.
So do you think he just kind of worked that ridge and just kind of like bedded up for the day?
Yeah, that's what my kind of thought is. But just, it just kind of, I guess the point there is that, that was an instance where I had to sit the same spot day over day. And if I sat there all day, maybe I got a shot at him. You know what I mean? Maybe he comes down to 10, that's great. You know what I mean? Because that was in the window of time that he would have, been cruising through.
Yeah.
And never in a million years would I have thought to be up there, because we had a camera running up there, and I checked a camera in that area, and there was one good buck that came through there, and it wasn't him. And so there wasn't a lot of activity up there in general. And I've postseason scouted that in the past, and I've not found really any deer sign up there either. So it was just kind of curious that that's where he was at, but not far up that 2-track. I had a camera on a scrape that used to be along that 2-track. This is an area that I hunt with Chads. They're all, truthfully, they're all Chad's cameras. Like he puts, Do
you make him bring all the cameras when you go on trips with him?
No, the funny story about that is like, he will not let me hang my own camera anytime we go anywhere.
Oh, really?
What I mean? Like, yeah, pretty much. Like, he'll just have like a slew of them. I'll be like, I'll bring some cameras. He's like, no, I got them. Don't worry about it. I got all the cameras.
That's a good friend to have, though.
It's like, but it makes you feel bad. It's like, man, let me put some cameras out. It's like, but he's like, no. He's like, I got them. Like, I got a bunch of cameras. Don't worry about it. So, but anyway, like that deer was actually crossing that 2-track further up. So he does spend some time on the top of that ridge. I just would have never guessed it was
right.
It would have been that day. But that's an instant, that area, that place, like you have to be patient and hunt, because you may miss the one day that deer is going to come through and tend that scrape, or that he's going to come through that funnel, or or whatever the case is, or cruise that doe bedding area, or whatever it is. If you're moving, you miss it by a day, you could hunt 2 weeks and not see that deer.
Yeah, it sounds like a spot that you might not see a lot of deer, but when you do see deer, it's going to be the deer, if that makes sense. Like, I've got a couple of those spots here in Michigan. It's like, you're not going to see a whole gaggle of them, which is probably a good thing unless you like seeing deer. But typically those bucks aren't going to be hanging out with a gaggle of deer, really.
Yeah, yeah, and so yeah, exactly. That's kind of like this place. It's like you're going to see, you're not going to see a lot of deer, but the chances of you seeing a deer of a lifetime is there.
Yeah.
And you could possibly see a deer that you'll never ever see again in your life, type of thing.
Yeah.
All wasn't lost. I moved spots that day. I went to another area. It was at this point off the backside of this ridge, and ended up having, I guess it was like a Pope and Young 8-point come through, and let him go. And because I was planning to go back over Thanksgiving, but we didn't go back home for Thanksgiving, so my wife's whole family got the Rona. So
sure.
So that squashed us going back to try to do that hunt again. So I ate a tag when I could have filled it, but such is life.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful with your time too, man. We've been on here for almost 2 hours now, but I do have a couple rapid fire questions for you that I like to do at the end of some of these podcasts. So after this, we'll wrap it up, but couple on the spot here. If you could have any state in, the Midwest to hunt whitetails, and it cannot be Iowa, what state is that going to be?
Oh, man. I would say probably Kansas, although I've never hunted it. I mean, I'm hunting it this year, but just like the opportunity to kill giants is there. And it's, the idea of like ground hunting and glassing, you know what I mean, is interesting to me. But there's a little spot in Missouri that I kind of semi fell in love with this past year. That's some boat access, and Chad, within 30 minutes of us being there, essentially, he jumped a deer that was probably in the 160s, and I ended up almost getting run over by one. Literally, I could have reached out and grabbed his antlers and rodeoed him. He ran by me that close, and he was in the 150s.
Oh wow!
And so, yeah, we found a good little spot. And so it would have to be one of those two.
I got you. Okay. Fixed blade or mechanical broadheads?
Fixed.
Okay. Do you have a specific, are you, a specific brand that you're loyal to?
Yeah. I mean, I shoot the Day 6 Gear Evos.
Okay.
And I just, I have a small wingspan, and so my draw length isn't super, super long. And I was listening to a guy, this is years ago, talk about mechanicals versus fixed blades. And he's not an advocate for one or the other. He's an advocate for the right tool for the right application.
Yep.
And what he was basically saying is that, his recommendation is like any guy who shoots a bow that draws, I think it was like 60 or 65 pounds and has like a 28-inch draw or better, like shoot mechanicals if you want to, right? Because the energy loss you're going to have on that thing opening isn't going to be to a detriment, right? He's like, but anyone who has a draw length that's like 26 and a half, 27 inches, right? Even if you're pulling 65 pounds, if your draw length is under 27, he was like, you should be shooting fixed all day. He's like, because you're just never going to create enough energy. You're going to lose so much energy on, what we might call like marginal shots,
right.
Or maybe you make a bad shot. You're losing so much energy on that broadhead opening that you could really do yourself a disservice. So I have a 26.5-inch draw, so I switched to fixed blades.
Okay, I got you. Now, if you had 7 days to hunt, and you can break these 7 up, or you can group them together throughout the year, when are you taking those 7 days to hunt?
Man, I would like to take a couple of them right around like the 18th, 19th, and 20th
of October.
Of October, yeah. I've running trail cameras. I've had some of the better deer in the areas that I've hunted happen to like hit scrapes and open up scrapes and start to move. Then, like I've gotten some pretty mature deer make some mistakes within that window. And it actually is consistent with what Greg has seen, decades of running trail cameras that he's run all over the place. Like he's seen that too. And I mentioned it to him one day, and he was like, "It's funny you mentioned those dates." He's like, "Because those are the exact dates that I see mature deer get up on their feet for like the first time in daylight and start to move."
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll kind of like, then they'll chill out a little bit. And then it's that classic, 26th, 27th, 28th, you know what I mean? Type of time frame, maybe. And then well, we'll just say the Halloween time frame, like the 3 days, like around Halloween, right? Like, whether it's the 30th, 31st, and the 1st, or whatever the case is, like those are always good. And then for me, it's probably, man, I'm torn between like the 6th, 7th, 8th type of time frame, because I've had good luck then, but I've also had I've seen really good action like around like the 11th, 12th, 13th, or like 12th, 13th, 14th. So I'd probably go 12th, 13th, and 14th, like that second week in November.
Okay.
Somewhere in there would probably be like the 3 different times I would be. If I could only choose a couple days out of the year and I had to split them up between a couple different time frames and to try to optimize my time in the field, it'd probably be those 3 time frames.
Okay. Good deal. Last one here. If you, coming up to the 2021 fall, if you can call your shot on what day is it going to be? What day is it going to happen for you this year?
Man, I don't, it's, let's see, it'll be the 17th of October.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. This will be archived. This is on the record now, so we can go back.
The reason I'm saying that is because there's a primary scrape area that I have a few deer that are hitting. If any of them made it, that was the window when they started opening. That was whenever I started seeing like those mature deer start to move, and they were all kind of in this one area. And that's because I hunted him on the whatever day it was, like the 17th this year, and he showed up the 18th, and I hunted him a week later, and he showed up the day after I hunted him. So it's that window, it's that day, and it'll be whatever that Saturday is. Put it that way, because I can't hunt Sunday. So whatever that Saturday is the day that the day that I think I'm going to get it done.
Plus or minus a day or two. So
exactly.
I got you.
Give me a buffer for Pennsylvania having shitty hunting dates.
I know, man. I will give you a buffer. I will.
Right.
And I'm going to be calling you, or you're going to be, hitting me up. Hey, dude, it happened. So when it does happen, we're doing another podcast for it.
Deal.
Well, good deal, man. Hey, and last thing, I want you to tag, or, throw everything out there that you're doing, social channels, Skull Brew, everything. Kind of let everybody know where they can find everything that you're doing.
Sure, man. Well, first, appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to talk to the folks that listen to your podcast. But if you want to check out the stuff I have going on, truthfromthestand.com is one place. The podcast is Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast on iTunes, all the places where you'd find podcasts. I have a YouTube channel. I try to put up a video a month, and all the podcasts are there as well. I primarily focus on DIY, public land, bow hunting, travel hunting, that type of stuff. And that's really what the YouTube channel is kind of geared around, as well as like gear modifications, because I dig making my own gear and modding stuff. And then Skull Brew Coffee Company, it's skullbrewcoffee.com. If you're into coffee, it'd be rad if you would check it out. And otherwise, man, you can catch me on Instagram, Truth from the Stand on Instagram, Facebook. I hang on there, mainly on Instagram. But always down to talk deer, man. So if you're out there and you want to chat, you can slip into my DMs, as the kids say.
There you go.
Slide into my DMs, I guess is how they say it. I don't know. Maybe I'm too old to know how they say it. But I'm there hanging out. So if you want to chat, send me a DM and we'll strike up a conversation.
Cool, man. Well, Clint, thank you very much for coming on. I really greatly appreciate it. We'll have to do this again for sure. If you will come back on, I would greatly appreciate having you on again. So.
Yeah, absolutely, man. For sure. Anytime.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess we're going to sign off, and hopefully everybody enjoyed that. So thank you very much, Clint. And I'm just going to end it. Abrupt ending. I just like doing abrupt. So here it is. Boom, we're done. And there you have it. Another great episode. Clint, thank you very much, man, for coming on and doing this. I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to remind you guys again, please go to iTunes, leave a 5-star rating, leave a review. That would be greatly appreciated. Don't forget to go to IamHumanimal.com. Check out all the stories, all the new content we have up there. And hopefully you guys have a great, safe weekend. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you right here next week.